ready to rock and roll. And so I don't want to lose any additional time because I want to spend some time with you talking with you about the groundwater approach. I'm Dr. Rochell Dunham, and I'm actually an addiction psychiatrist, but I serve as the executive director and the medical director for Metropolitan Human Services District, which is a local governing entity for public healthcare for the state of Louisiana. We provide services in New Orleans, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines parishes for people who are indigent, uninsured, and Medicaid predominantly, but they all suffer with addiction, mental illness, or intellectual and developmental disabilities. Many of them have a combination of those needs. And so my staff, interestingly enough, is about 80% African-American, and so is our patient population. Our 3 parishes have a slightly different distribution, but 85% of the people we see are in Orleans. It's the largest of the 3 parishes. So this type of conversation is very relevant, though we don't have as much of the challenge as I think some agencies have, where there is not the matching of ethnicity of persons served with persons providing services. However, because of the pervasiveness of racism and in this country, we all experience it in various ways. And so this discussion will be relevant independent of what type of environment you're working in, because we all live in the country and we all struggle with these issues. And so I hope this is helpful to you. And at the end, we will have some time to have some discussion. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So I want to issue a disclaimer for you. The first thing is that the Groundwater Metaphor is the sole property of the Racial Equity Institute, LLC. And this is a organization that does trainings and organizational preparation to advance racial inclusivity and diversity. And so I want to give them credit for what I'm going to share with you. In their world, it is important to them that this information is shared, and the use of the metaphor is very helpful because it allows us to have a real rational way to think about this. So more about the REI process. It's designed to help leaders and organizations who want to proactively understand and address racism, both in their organization and in the community where the organization is working. The Equity Institute really does trainings anywhere from 18 months to 2 years for organizations. I will share with you that I did a 2-day immersion training, which is also something that they do with organizations to get bulk numbers of their people immersed into the type of process that they offer. That was a very, I guess, and to some degree, I don't want to say life-changing experience, but it was very, very valuable to me in developing my own narrative around conversations involving race. And I find that this is, and you probably can relate to this, this is a lot of the struggle for many people, how to have these conversations, how to do it and maintain your integrity to your beliefs. How to do it and not be sidelined by distractors that enter the conversation often. There are lots of books out there. There's lots of guidance out there right now, which is wonderful because there are many, many opportunities to begin to get coaching and to thinking through how you need to frame your own narrative. But they do have an 18 to 2-year process, but they also have two-day training. So I would suggest that you go on their website and get a better sense of what they have to offer. Their approach in helping groups deal with issues of racial inclusion and diversity involves several things. First of all, the organization needs to create a plan of change. So this has to be intentional and meaningful and very specific to the needs of that organization. They recommend ongoing reflection, both of the group's process as well as any material that has been shared so that people can continue to grow in this area. Periodic check-ins to ensure that the organization is receiving the support that they need, because this is work that requires a lot of support, because there are a lot of minefields that you can run into and really get completely sidelined or distracted and not able to continue the process. And that's really because of the energy around conversations involving race. They also recommend an organizational assessment, and that's probably needs to be at the top of the list because it is important to know what are the attitudes and feelings about racism that exists in your own organization that you need to target as a part of this change process. And then they have a number of workshops, which I suggest that you go on their website and look into. And finally, an analysis of the organization's stage of development is also important in becoming an anti-racist organization. This is probably an ongoing process of analysis to see over time whether or not there has been progress and whether or not the changes that have been made have actually been sustained. The core practices of REI is to create structures to sustain anti-racist work, to perform an analysis of it, to see what are the cultural and historical roots. They also provide assistance in assessing your organization to determine its progress on a journey to becoming anti-racist, to develop an anti-racist vision and new plan for change. I know some of the national organizations have done this and have made statements and have backed it with actions that allow them to filter every aspect of what they do through the lens of anti-racism. And so these are the types of things that organizations like REI help others do. And then coaching, for example, for traditional and emerging leadership principles in the principles and practices of anti-racism. Coaching is a very valuable thing, what to say, what to do, how to react, because this is often the scenario when faced with situations that require some type of a change. So let's get into the groundwater metaphor. So in an effort to help leaders and organizations, as I said, stay focused on the cultural and structural roots of racial inequity, in 2013, Joyce James and Baylove developed the groundwater metaphor. And it is an accompanying analytical framework to explain the nature of racism. So we, as it currently exists in the United States, we spend a lot of time, or a lot of what the movement is about right now is helping people understand what are the origins and where is it coming from. Critical, because in order to substantiate why there needs to be so much effort in this area, there needs to be the historical component presented, and as well as the origins, but then we have to also explain the nature of it, because conceptually some people struggle with it, interestingly enough, but people struggle with understanding what racism really is, and that struggle often leads to difficulty accepting that it exists. And so metaphors, and this one in particular, is intentional in helping to get beyond the barrier of the cognitive difficulties that people experience in understanding the concept. So again, it was created by Joyce James and Baylove in 2013, but it was inspired by the work of Dr. Kamara Phyllis Jones. And I'm not sure if you all know Dr. Jones, but she has tremendous insights about the power of allegory to make complex concepts easily understandable. I mean, this is sort of her signature work in this area. And she is an epidemiologist and a research director of social determinants of health and equity at the CDC. She authored The Gardener's Tale. I would suggest you Google The Gardener's Tale and listen to her YouTube presentation. She also has done the cliff analogy, but she has like a whole host of metaphors or where she demonstrates the use of allegory. And her ability to do this really is masterful in calling out and addressing barriers to understanding and acknowledgement of the truths about racism. And she will tell you that you have to name it in order to begin to address it, and any sidelining, calling it what it is, which is racist practices, will not result in change. So I would suggest you, if you're not familiar with any of her work, that you do at least listen to The Gardener's Tale and become more familiar with her and take advantage of opportunities where she is the guest presenter. So the groundwater metaphor for structural racism is then the nexus of many years of movement building and anti-racist community organizing. The two developers of it really have benefited from the collective input of thousands of organizers and community members and leaders from across the United States and beyond who have done the work and done the research around anti-racism and racism in this country and around the world. The use of the metaphor is encouraged to further the work in our various environments, and hence this presentation today, because it's something that we think is important that those of you who have chosen to hear this, and then you too can share this metaphor with others so that they can understand and become more knowledgeable about what we mean when we say there's a need for change along the lines of racist practices in this country. So it's based on 3 observations. First of all, racial inequity looks the same across systems. This is a premise. These are the premises around which add value to and justify why the metaphor is true. So first of all, racial inequity looks the same across systems. Secondly, socioeconomic difference does not explain the racial inequity. So many times we say that if you have money, you can buy your way out of being or experiencing racist practices, but the data will show that it has nothing to do with socioeconomics. And then third, inequities are caused by systems, regardless of people's cultural behavior. So it's not, the solutions are not in people, the solutions are in changing systems. It's aligned with many who trace racial inequity too. And these are some of the words you see in racial equity literature. Structural racism, that it is embedded in the way that systems are created. And then you'll see structural racialization, which speaks to the action around it. And then it is promoted and represented in ways that create racial tensions and environments to continue to proliferate. And then race-based caste system, which probably is one of the best descriptors of what exists, because in truth, it is a caste system. I'm not sure if you all have read the book Caste by Isabella Wilkerson, The Origin of Our Descent. Excellent, excellent work. I mean, it's the best written work on the American caste system. She calls it out in very defensible ways. She's done a phenomenal job researching it, and she uses the comparison of the caste system in India and the parallels that exist between the caste system in India, which most people have called out, but people have not historically called out the American system, a caste system. The caste system here is based on race, which is an artificial construct. It has no biological basis and is strictly based upon the pigmentation of your skin. But these are complex terms that can be hard to grasp. And so because of that, metaphors or allegory is used. So here we go. So here's the groundwater metaphor. It's the fish, the lake, and the groundwater. So consider this: if you had a lake in front of your house and one fish is floating belly up, dead, it would make sense to analyze that fish, correct? I mean, what's wrong with it? Imagine a fish as one student failing in the education system. And you'd ask, well, did that child study hard enough? Are they getting enough support at home? Do they have all the materials that they need? Are they showing up in class regularly? But if you come out to the same lake and half the fish are floating belly up dead, what should you do then? This time you've got to analyze the lake, right? Imagine the lake is the entire education system and half the students are failing. This time we might ask, well, might the system itself be causing such consistent, unacceptable outcomes for students? Because now we don't have just one, we have many. And we can't just attribute all of the failings to not having support or not having books or not coming to class, because it's not necessarily true for all of them. So what exactly is going on? So if the system is failing, if so, how? Now I want you to picture 5 lakes around your house. And in each and every lake, half the fish are floating belly up dead, half of the fish. 5 lakes, half the fish. What is it this time? What is it at this time that we should do? We say it's time to analyze the groundwater. How did the water in all 5 of these lakes end up with the same contamination? This is a question that has to be asked. So on the surface, the lakes don't appear to be connected because they're in different areas. They don't seem to have tributaries that link them together. But is it possible, even likely, that they are connected? In fact, in truth, over 95% of the fresh water on this planet is not above ground where we can see it. It is below the surface in the groundwater. And so the groundwater really is the common denominator with all of these 5 lakes, which actually does link them together. And so what about that? So now it's time then to imagine half the kids in a given region are failing in the education system. Half the kids suffer from ill health. Half are performing poorly in the criminal justice system. Half are struggling in and out of child welfare systems. And it's often the same kids in each system. So we've got 5 lakes that are considered systems here: education, health, criminal justice, child welfare, and all of the kids in all of these systems are failing. So what is the groundwater analogy here? So by using a groundwater approach, one might begin to ask these questions. Why are educators creating the same racial inequity as doctors, police officers, and the child welfare workers? How might our systems be connected? Most importantly, how do we use our position in one system to impact a structural racial arrangement that might be deeper than any single system? To fix fish, in essence, or to clean up one lake at a time simply will not work. So when organizations decide that they need to do something within the infrastructure of the agency that speaks specifically to a division in their agency or an individual in their agency, it just simply won't work for the agency to get at the heart of what the issues are. So all we do is put, in this analogy, put fixed fish back into toxic water or filter a lake that is quickly recontaminated by the toxic groundwater, because we have not, once again, addressed the groundwater in the case of systems, the structural barriers that are created at the systemic level. So the groundwater metaphor is designed to help practitioners at all levels internalize the reality that we live in a racially structured society, and that is what causes racial inequity. It's based on 3 observations. Racial inequity looks the same across systems. Socioeconomic difference does not explain the racial inequity, and inequities are caused by systems regardless of people's culture or behavior. And that was worth mentioning twice. But embracing these truths forces leaders to confront the reality that all of our systems, all of our institutions, and outcomes emanate from a racial hierarchy on which the United States was built. In other words, we have a groundwater problem and we need groundwater solutions. For those of you who are in positions of power where your voice, your understanding, your narrative, if you will, is influential to change, I want you to pay close attention to some of what's going to be shared with you in the next few slides. So racial inequity looks the same across systems, and here's some data that's based on national data for African Americans and whites, where we see consistent inequity in healthcare, education, law enforcement, child welfare, and finance, to name a few.
Dr. Dunham?
So, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we actually can't see your slides.
You can't see my slides?
No, ma'am. Do you mind sharing your slides with us?
Okay, I'm so sorry. I wish you had told me that earlier. Okay, can you see them now?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for telling me that. All right, I'm so sorry you all weren't seeing what I was sharing with you. Hopefully you were following me. But let me continue on. All right, so these are examples. I'm gonna just go back to the previous slide just so that you see what that slide looked like. So racial inequities looks the same across systems, and here are some examples of how this problem permeates multiple systems. So according to the data from corresponding federal agencies, African Americans are 2.3 times more likely to experience infant death. African Americans are 1.9 times more likely to die of diabetes. African Americans are 1.5 times more likely to be below proficiency in reading in the 4th grade. African Americans are 3.7 times more likely to be suspended in K through 12. African Americans are 2.7 times more likely to be searched on a traffic stop. African Americans are 7 times more likely to be incarcerated as adults. African Americans are 1.8 times more likely to be identified as victims by the child welfare system. African Americans are 2.1 times more likely to be in foster care. African Americans business owners are 5.2 times more likely to be denied a loan, and African American business owners are 1.7 times more likely to own a home. And so I want to show you this graphically as well so that you can get a sense of what this looks like. Just another visual. So what this figure shows is that African Americans are 1.5 to 7 times as likely to have a bad outcome across systems. And this compares African American data in the red bar and white data in the black bar. And as you can see, consistently across all 5 systems, for whites, there is a consistently low likelihood that they will have a bad outcome in any of these systems: health, education, criminal, legal, child welfare, and finance. For African Americans, you can see in all of these systems, the red line is above the black line, and there is a higher likelihood, from 1.5 times the chance in below proficiency in 4th grade to 7 times the likelihood in being incarcerated as an adult, that an African American will have a bad outcome. The other high area is in being denied a loan. And so all these things are very much linked to the ability to move progressively in this country, being able to earn income, being able to not have a criminal record, because you know criminal records are linked to just about every application that you fill out. There are questions about, have you ever been arrested? And because states have not made a decision to expunge records in a way that gives people the chance to reform their lives, this comes back to haunt people for many, many years, including being able to get a driver's license, which is absolutely critical in order to even fly from one state to the next. And so all of these are clearly higher bad outcomes at various percentages for African Americans over whites. So this kind of advantage automatically sets up a system of failure. And these things have been strategically done in order to make sure that this statistics remain persistent. Another way to look at the same information is the same data can be arranged with whites as the reference group demonstrates the same point with a different frame. Whites are only 15 to 65% as likely to have a bad outcome across systems. So if you look at this graph, again, African Americans in red, whites in black, and across all systems, the percent likelihood of having a bad outcome is 100% for African Americans in all of these systems: for infant death, death from diabetes, below proficiency in 4th grade, suspended in K through 12, searched on a routine traffic stop, incarcerated as an adult, identified as a victim of child welfare, in foster care, denied a loan, don't own a home. And so these cross-cutting metrics that control for economics, and it controls for other factors that you would think would separate people, like education. So independent of where and how your wealth or your education as an African American in this country, the likelihood of you experiencing these things in an unfavorable way is tremendously greater than if you are a white person in this country. And this data demonstrates that very nicely. And the common denominator is race-based, the race-based caste system that we live in this country. And so the metaphor indicates or shows us that the groundwater in this case is the race-based caste system. And it is the component, it runs consistently through all of these areas. And it is the issue that has to be addressed in order for us to see a leveling or equalizing of what we're seeing in the African American community as compared to white communities in terms of these areas of deficiency reducing. So I want to make a couple of final statements. First of all, disproportionality in our healthcare system is very much aligned with the global disproportionality we experience in all major systems that impact people of color. And you've seen that on the last two slides, and hopefully the groundwater metaphor helps you understand that in addressing those issues, you really cannot continue to look at the fish and the lakes. You have to look at the underlying systems that feed and have structured us to be this way. What we see with COVID-19 is the indisputable evidence that a history of poor healthcare results in generations of poor healthcare. And that poor healthcare coupled with more vulnerability means more deaths for the most vulnerable, namely people of color. And we've seen this. The initial rates of death were predominantly African Americans and Hispanics. And in some areas, one dominated the other, depending upon the ethnic mix of areas, but independent of where, highest rates in people of color, deaths, intubations, and so forth for having to address this condition. And what we're seeing again will be ongoing increases in the number of people of color dying with the variant if changes aren't made with vaccination in a favorable way. But all of this is very traumatizing, and traumatization is the all too familiar outcome. And as you know, trauma really does require targeted interventions to reverse it, because it is not the changes that occur in the brain as a result of trauma are unlikely to revert without some type of intervention. And the intervention that is at the larger level is systemic change, and systemic change around race-based practices that we live day in and day out. Now, there is a wave right now of interest in this conversation, and hence this talk and hence many talks. This is wonderful that firms and agencies and businesses have reacted to recent social justice events with well-intended press releases and statements reaffirming commitments to social change. But what we have to see is the actual changes occur with persistence and in a way that is impactful to our future generations. And so what we're doing now is really laying the groundwork for what other generations hopefully will enjoy as a non-race-based system in this country. But this will require allyship. So African Americans view allyship as a strategic mechanism used by individuals to become collaborators, accomplices, and conspirators who fight injustice and promote equity in the workspace through supportive personal relationships and public acts of sponsorship and advocacy. So this requires money. This requires white people or people in power or people who are privileged, really walking alongside and really moving the dial, because the power base is not in the people of color, it's in people who have enjoyed privilege over longer periods of time. So they have to be allies to strive to drive systemic improvements to workplace policies, practices, and cultures. And so it's a real important part of how this work has to be done. It's very nice in seeing the marches with people of all sorts of ethnic backgrounds walking together. It is going to take that, but it's going to take the people who are in power, who have benefited the most from systemic racism, to actually use that power to promote change for this country, to ultimately offer to everybody the availability to live their own truth and to be a maximum contributor to with this world based upon what their own gifting looks like. So in the end, change starts with individual leaders taking responsibility for their own attitudes and behaviors. So if you see something, you have to say something. It's not okay to pretend that this is not happening. It is happening. It's very real, and it's very problematic, and it has damaged generations in our culture over years. And so it's real important for all of us to exercise our voice and to be brave in every space that we're in. And so that concludes my presentation. But what I would like to say is that I would like for everyone to take advantage of this opportunity to have dialogues and to convene spaces where these conversations can take place. So I want to, at this point, stop sharing my screen and open up the floor for any questions or dialogue. Interested in your reactions to the metaphor and how that might be particularly relevant in your space and some of the work that you may be doing with your organizations. Thank you for joining this session. I think we have a few comments in the chat here. And I missed, you couldn't see the slides earlier, but hopefully you saw the latter ones. Any questions or any thoughts around the discussion?
I would say I appreciate the presentation. I learned a lot from it. I took a lot of notes. But I think it's so important because I work in the foster care system. Well, I started as a volunteer, so I said like that. So I started as a volunteer, and that's when I got a chance to see what was going on with the Child Protective Services. And then I'm actually working with the Dallas Disproportionality Advisory Committee, because looking at the numbers, African Americans, why they are being removed, and so what my conversation is now, because when we looked at the numbers, they're being removed more for neglect than abuse. So my question on the floor is, do you think this have anything to do with the biases? Because even when you look at the data, it's for emotional abuse, it's for, things of that nature. So that's the question that I have right now. And that's what we're talking about, because it is awful. And then when you look at the kids, when they actually leave foster care, they become homeless, incarcerated. So like you said, it is another system. And so it's just awful, but I appreciate you addressing it, because there's very few people that even bring up anything to do with the foster care system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pervasive. I would challenge you to pick a system that you think is not impactful to. And you will find that because it's not the actual division of service that's the problem. It is the entire system. It pervades every system, because we have people in those systems who are the targets of these acts. And so if there is a system in place that is intended to disadvantage some and benefit others, then it will manifest in various ways. And you're just giving an example of how it manifests in that system. Mm-hmm. But it is originating from the same strategic approach, which is to cast a veil over the entire population of people of color. Thank you for that.
Oh, not a problem.
Other thoughts? Interested in hearing your thoughts, your reactions. Where are you in your own narrative? Or you're not convinced? What else do you need to know? Reactions.
I think one of the concepts that I appreciated the most was that you talked about how some people simply do not understand racism. And I know for me, when I've tried to have conversations about this, that really just blocks me almost. And so to hear you explain that, yeah, sometimes we just really need to break it down and there are resources for that, just really kind of helped me feel like, okay, like this is not my job. And yeah, they may be struggling to understand that. And, you know, if they're interested, there are resources for that. I think that just really blocked me a lot when it came to racism work. And that I think has been the biggest kind of nugget that I'm taking.
Wonderful. If you get one nugget out of this, then I've done my job. So yeah, I appreciate that, Anna. It is so this is not a work that's just going to happen without putting some effort into it. There's some things that all of us have to do in order to better prepare ourselves and better posture ourselves to be able to have these conversations, because it all starts with conversations. And those conversations are most effective if you are informed, which means you're reading, you're attending webinars, you're getting the facts, you're understanding what's true, what's not. And in the process, you are then developing your own language, your own narrative, your own conversation, and you will find that you aren't weakened as much by challengers who purport that this is not real. And I hear you totally when you say, you know, this is not my fight, you know. And I hear how you're saying that, because there is a role that we have to play. But there are some things that we absolutely cannot do because we're not in power positions. We are not the people controlling the groundwater here. But we have to keep making sure that the issues continue to bubble up to the top, bubble up, so that there is continual push and continual effort and continual accountability and responsibility placed upon people who are privileged and have the power to make change if they decide to do so. So it is so important. I can't stress to you all enough that you have to develop and get your own narrative around this. And I say that because you have to have a level of comfort where you can speak to this and you're not so wavered by the reactions, because you know the reactions are powerful around this, and powerful from all people, not just white people. It's powerful from Black people too, because we have not been given or have not exercised the privilege, if you will, of being able to have these types of conversations and have them be sanctioned as, okay, yeah, that's appropriate to talk about. So I suggest that you take advantage of this period in our history where there is an appetite to hear these things, and use this time to get your own thoughts clearer and your own understandings clearer, because there's so much that all of us need to learn and understand better in order to do this work. And it will take all of us, everybody doing their part, for us to see this groundwater cleansing that we need for the changes needed in this race-based caste system that we live in the United States. Any other thoughts? We got about 5 more minutes.
I'd like to say that I learned a lot just listening to you. It would really be helpful if we could get see your slides, because we missed the first part of those. And I was struck by when you were talking about solutions are not in changing people, but we have to change the system. And I work for a large hospital organization, and I think they're taking some steps, but we definitely have a long way to go. So I learned a lot, but I'm also, if you will remind me, what was the name of the author of the Caste that you mentioned, and also The Gardener's Tale?
Dr. Kamara Jones is The Gardener's Tale, and I'll put it in the chat. For The Gardener's Tale is Dr. Kamara Jones. And for the, I'm sorry, I got some typos there, but it's the Gardener's Tale. And then Caste, the origin of our descents. That is Isabel Wilkerson.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
I just want to ask this question about, because I experienced racism in a large nonprofit. And one of the things in going to a training, it talked about you have to mess with the money. So I filed a complaint with EEOC. Do you think that's been really helpful or beneficial? What are your thoughts on that?
For you to file a complaint with EOC?
Do they really do anything?
I'm not probably the best person to speak to that, but I think generally having the bravery and having the sense of entitlement to be righted by a wrong is absolutely the right thing to do.
Okay.
And there are a number of ways to do that. That is one way.
Okay.
And if that was the way that you chose to do it, then that's probably the right decision for you. But the bigger issue is being able to feel entitled to be treated a certain way, and then to follow through with actions that ensure that somebody is going to take accountability for your being treated inappropriately. And that's the harder work. Sometimes that's just speaking up in a meeting when something's said that is just completely inappropriate. You know what I mean? So it doesn't have to be a major lawsuit. It really more often than not is dealing with all of those little microaggressions that happen just as a matter of course, but also being smart and strategic about picking your battles, because this can consume you and it can be very exhaustive. And so I would suggest that you not chase everything out there, but we all ought to be chasing something. Okay, we've got 2 minutes. Anybody else before we leave this session? So I'll just say thank you all once again for joining. I hope, and I apologize that you did not see the slides. What I'll do is I'll share those with the conveners, and then they can share them with you all. But if you were listening, that's probably the most important thing, that you heard the things that I was saying and that you were marinating on those things. That's the most important thing. And hopefully that helps you to understand and become more comfortable in deciding and figuring out what your role is in this struggle, because it really is a struggle. But we all have to be in it together to ensure the generations behind us, when they're asked, well, what did you do? We have a good answer to share with them. Thank you all so much. You all have a great rest of your meeting, and I appreciate talking with you this morning.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.